Apsana Begum is one of the few working-class Muslim women elected in Parliament, representing popular Limehouse since 2019. She's been a fearless champion for causes like taking on poverty and fighting for peace, but she's spoken out about her experiences of domestic abuse, and she faces an attempt to deselect her as a Labour MP, and how the abuse that she said she has suffered has been weaponised against her, and the Labour Party itself has failed, many have argued, in its duty of care. Apsana, it's such an honour to speak to you on International Women's Day. Hello.
Hi, Owen.
Now, you took time off work after your experiences, and you began a phased return back in the autumn of 2022. But you said that there'd been a failure in a duty of care in relation to your health and well-being. So I just want to know if you could just explain to us, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think even just entering Parliament, I mean, I'm the first hijab-wearing MP in Parliament. You would think that there would be more support provided to me than the average Labour MP. I mean, nobody who looks like me has ever entered Parliament before, and you know, the experience has been the complete opposite. There just isn't the support in place in the party to protect or safeguard people like me. And what I said in June 2020, in September 2022, after I came back from a period of sickness, is I don't think anything much has changed. And I my independent domestic violence advocate working with Refuge, said that the trigger process was an extension of the abuse that I'd already endured. But I reached out to the party. I sent correspondence to the party. I asked for support. And that didn't come through. And I think that does definitely still pose questions as to the support that is able to be provided by the Labour Party to survivors of domestic abuse, because I certainly don't feel that I've had any meaningful engagement or support on this front.
So just to be clear, some people might not be familiar with some of the terminology. So when you talk about a trigger process, a trigger ballot, what that means is a vote to trigger the process to potentially deselect you, remove you as the Labour candidate, which you elected back in 2019. So you just want to explain, in terms of talking about that being weaponised, what you went through for those factional ends, because you're someone on the left, of the Labour Party. But what do you mean by that in terms of the trigger process and how that's been abused?
Yeah, I mean, I contacted the Labour Party, I contacted the General Secretary during the trigger process, as you say, which is a process which determines, whether the sitting Labour MP should be reselected and fight as the Labour candidate in the next general election. That's the process we have in the Labour Party. But it became very clear to me and to people around me, including Labour Party members locally in Poplar and Limehouse, that my ex-husband and his allies were very much involved in that process, despite him being under investigation following a complaint I put in, looking at the timeline now, a year and a half ago. So I'm still waiting for a conclusion to that complaint that I made about my ex-husband a year and a half ago. And nonetheless, he was able to participate in that process. And as I've said, my independent domestic violence advocate saw that and believed that to be an extension of the abuse I'd already endured up to that point. But look, I contacted the party, I communicated with the General Secretary, and put forward the warnings that were given by my advocate. But what I received instead was a standard pro forma response from the party safeguarding team, nothing at all from the party leader. And that process, which in some cases can go on for about a month, it still continued to go on for a further 13 days after concerns were raised until its ultimate completion. So, it was a process that made me sick. It made me unwell because I have been raising my concerns about my ex-husband with the party for some time now. And there was no intervention by the party at any level to ensure that the process could ensure my safety and could ensure my well-being.
I mean, what do you think it tells us that about the inner workings of the Labour Party, that your husband, who's under investigation, you've spoken about your experiences of domestic abuse, that there hasn't been action to prevent that in as you say, because your support has made it clear that this is an extension of the abuse that you face. What does it tell us about the inner workings of the Labour Party that isn't being taken seriously?
I mean, I think the question definitely comes up for me, certainly, about, whether there's one rule applied for some and another rule applied for me. And I can't think of any other example or case in the Labour Party or any other MP that is being treated in the way that I am being treated by the Labour Party. And, the question comes up, why did the Labour Party continue to carry out and go forward with the trigger process whilst I was certified off sick? When there doesn't seem to be any particular reason as to why there could not have been a postponement, and that this process was damaging my health even further. And when not all MPs face trigger ballots. I understand the Bury South MP Christian Wakeford will not face a trigger ballot process. It's to my understanding that in 2019, a number of other Labour MPs were midway through similar challenges, and it's understood that the party's National Executive Committee decided to endorse them all as candidates ahead of the SNAP general election. I can think of, to my understanding, two other examples. Lynn Brown, my colleague in West Ham, in 2019, she's not faced her trigger ballot process as yet, even though the party said it was a priority last year to complete the trigger ballot processes and her local parties in special measures. It's also, to my understanding, actually, Owen, that in Bradford West, Naz Shah, her trigger process started in early 2022, but was postponed and then recommenced later on last year. But there's been nothing in that sense for someone like me who has gone through what I've gone through, and that definitely leaves me and others certainly, questioning whether there is a specific set of rules being applied to me and some available for others, and other measures being available for other people.
I mean, a striking example was that of Ellie Reeves, who's Labour MP for Lewisham West. And I mean, in that case, didn't even start a trigger process. Basically, a party member suggested she should face a trigger ballot, but then Jeremy Corbyn's office wrote to the Parliamentary Labour Party, this was in 2019, to clarify that any pregnant MP would be exempt from reselection processes used to confirm candidates for the next general election. So under the last leadership, there was a ruling essentially from the leadership that if a woman was pregnant, that she wouldn't suffer or go through a trigger ballot process to potentially have her deselected as a Labour MP. But you're someone who's spoken about experiences of domestic abuse. You've suggested that is being weaponised locally in an attempt to deselect you. I would argue that's a far, far more serious set of circumstances than being pregnant. And yet we haven't had action taken as action was taken under the last leadership.
Yeah, and it's again, to my understanding, that it was raised by multiple representatives on the National Executive Committee to no avail. And as these examples, like the one that you've mentioned, show, I mean, there does appear to be precedent in the Labour Party for halting or postponing trigger processes after they've started, if it's thought to be necessary. And I gave the example of Naz Shah's trigger, that's more of a recent example, I guess, in terms of the last year. It started in January, February, I believe, to my understanding, postponed and then recommenced in October last year. But what I'm having is, a wall of silence, and I certainly feel like, there is a level of institutional gaslighting that I'm being subjected to over the situation and over the evidences, complaints, and issues that I've raised with the party at all levels.
I mean, as you say, you were in touch with David Evans, who's the General Secretary of the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer, who's the leader of the Labour Party, but you didn't get a response. Can you just, what does that tell us? How does that leave you feeling that you haven't had an official response from the party?
Yeah, I believe that I've been a victim of intimidation, thuggery, and misogyny. I think what I've experienced is intolerable. It's unacceptable. But then when I see the way that I've been treated by the party at the highest level, I definitely feel then on top of that, I'm being left isolated and then exposed as well. And shamefully, I think like those that should have defended me have stood by either as bystanders or have allowed for this situation to continue. And I've already been through a vexatious court case. I've then had to go through this trigger process mired by these kinds of behaviours, and then the trigger process continues in my absence. I just can't imagine anyone having to ever face anything like this, but yet this is happening. And then what I would say about, I guess, what you say about the leadership and the General Secretary's involvement in terms of the processes, I think about the Ford report, actually. I think about what the Ford report, said about factionalism of the party machine, and saying that in 2015, the majority of the party's senior staff did not see their roles as requiring neutrality or even the appearance of it. And that's what I end up thinking about when I see the treatment that I'm having in the party currently.
And for those who don't know, the Ford report was commissioned by the leadership of the Labour Party after a leaked report showing messages between senior Labour Party officials, which suggested examples of overt hostility to the leadership, but also accusations have been made about racism, which the Ford report then investigated. You said back in September 2022, you addressed a campaign group of the Socialist Campaign Group is for those who don't know, is the left-wing grouping of MPs within the Labour Party. And you said that this socialist Muslim working class woman will not be silenced. So I'm just interested in how you think you've been targeted specifically as a socialist Muslim working class woman.
Yeah, I mean, entering Parliament, I guess, at a time, it was December 2019, the first hijab-wearing woman in Parliament, with a government governed by Boris Johnson, who once described niqabi women as letterboxes. I chose to also do my first speech in Parliament on International Women's Day, because I come from a very proud tradition in the East End, of working class socialism, of campaigning against racism. And like, some of my predecessors, including Mildred Gordon, we're really proud people in the East End. We're fighters. And, I remember my selection as the parliamentary candidate. And, I feel like I've been standing up for my constituents ever since that time, looking at the various layers and sections to have to contend with at a local level. And it's no secret that I was opposed by many of the Labour councillors and the Labour group in Tower Hamlets, who not only did they oppose and unite in a campaign against my selection, but then refused to campaign in my election, and then refused to fund or to be party to anything that would support a parliamentary candidate, especially a new parliamentary candidate standing for election. But it comes back to me about why did I stand and why is it important? It's very, very important that we have socialist Muslim working class women in Parliament, and to have that sort of representation and to have those voices heard in a place like Westminster. And I know in that vein, as I said in September last year, that I won't be silenced and I won't be going away. Because the duty that I have is to all those people very much like me and beyond, because we all face challenges and people are going through so many different things, like right now in the cost of living crisis. But it's so important to make sure that we don't accept and we don't give in to the kind of pressures that people are being put under. To only have one set of values or one set of way of doing things. I don't believe that, and I think it's really important for me to continue to speak out on behalf of others as well.
I mean, just you've said already quite a lot about this, but just is there any of the ways that the abuse that you've spoken about you said it's been weaponized against you for factional reasons. So just to explain what you mean by this and why you think this is still the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember back in June 2022 when I did fall sick, and I submitted my fit note to the General Secretary and the Leader's Office, and it's shocking that over half of the trigger ballot meetings were allowed to continue in my absence. But I think what's even more shocking in some ways is the fact that I remember different parts and different sections of the party apparatus were briefing out that the fit note had not been sent or had not been received. So it really makes me feel as though, well, if we try and understand what gaslighting is, gaslighting is when somebody, say in an individual level, says that the thing that happened didn't happen. And then the second layer of that is, you're kind of crazy or mad for saying that this happened. And at an institutional level, I feel like, well, I've said I've submitted the fit note and there's evidence that I've submitted the fit note. And then I'm hearing that apparently I've not submitted the fit note and it's not been received. Mm-hmm. And then it's, and then when I come back in September 2022, there's a range of smears and propagation of the idea that I'm basically like, not fit and, and what I'm saying is completely untrue. And I think ultimately, I think the leadership of David Evans and Keir Starmer, have to be responsible. I think it's upsetting, that the Labour Party continue to make announcements about violence against women and domestic abuse when they're not protecting women in the party. And again, I refer to the Ford report, which you've explained for the viewers, but it clearly stated about us living in a political environment that normalizes disrespect or discourages, I think it was any notion of vulnerability. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here. Mm-hmm. And the responsibility to behave respectfully needs to come, I think it's said consistently from the top. Mm-hmm. And I think, in that sense, ultimately it is the leadership of David Evans and Keir Starmer that are responsible for what is happening in this situation with me.
What do you say to your critics who would say, just face the selection process and move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are those in the party that will just want me to sort of shut up and go away. But not least because of the extent to which they have gone to get rid of me. I still remember the last day of the vexatious court case, as I describe it, and regional officials standing outside, nobody that came to ask what support I needed, but just waiting, for the verdict. Nothing even, to congratulate or to put out a hand of support once I was cleared of those vexatious court charges. But I think, there are of course those that are going to not want me to continue, and they will not want to admit that they've gone to these great lengths to get rid of me. And they'll want to make it as easy as possible for themselves. And clearly, the strategy is from their perspective is to continue to silence me and gaslight me. But because I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, and after everything that I've gone through, I cannot accept being silenced. I cannot accept submitting to anything that would devalue this. And the enormous step it's taken for me to speak out and facing the stigma and the backlash as a result. So I think there's nothing more important to me than this, for myself and for other survivors of domestic abuse that will be, if they've not heard about this case, they go to hear about it in the future, whether that's, survivors in Poplar and Limehouse or up and down the country, and I do get contacted by women up and down the country about this.
Just a couple of final things. It's International Women's Day, and just based on what you just said there, I mean, there's an estimated 1.4 million women who face domestic abuse each year in this country, which is a horrifying statistic. So I'm just wondering how you think your own situation relates to what other women are going for, why it's important, I suppose, that you've spoken out, and why your case is important for those, frankly, horrifyingly high numbers of women.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important, isn't it, to be able to give others the hope and courage to come forward. You know, and that's despite, you know, what some of us may go through for speaking out and experiencing backlash. I feel a strong sense of duty to encourage others to come forward. And look, I don't think my experiences are actually far from unique, actually, you know, and I think that's, you know, looking at the women that have been in touch from all over the country, you know, I think that signifies the fact that my experiences are far from unique. And I still think that domestic abuse is still something that's, you know, been hidden for far too long. What we do know is that the consequences of it are massive and long term, and you know, the consequences of it can be health consequences. Absolutely. As well. So I'm still determined to raise awareness, still campaign in this area. And as you say, I mean, I think with International Women's Day, when we take the opportunity to highlight achievements and struggles, of course. And for me, it comes back actually to you know, what we've achieved so far in East London. You know, we have such a huge and rich history of women's struggles for social justice. And it's in that tradition of, you know, the East London Federation of Suffragettes, that the history that I look at, you know, going back hundreds of years, that, you know, standing up against violence and against women and pioneering, I guess, women's activism is always going to be something that I focus on. And it's in that tradition that I was elected, you know, as the first, I remember it was the first ever British Bangladeshi secretary of the Tower Hamlets Labour Party, the first hijab-wearing MP. You know, these are milestones that have been achieved as a result of continuing to stand up for what's right. And of course, there is that, I mean, there is that feminist slogan, you know, the personal is political, and you know, recognizing the fact that women's lives are a part of a systemic and structural oppression. So, you know, whether that's standing up for women against domestic abuse, or women workers that are engaged in industrial disputes and action, fighting for their rights, the nurses, the civil service, the teachers, and I think we just must continue to stand together against these injustices.
Just very finally, at the end of 2022, the Patchwork Foundation awarded you an MP of the Year award. Now, obviously, it's been a very stressful time for you, so it's quite an achievement, I would say, to pick up that award. I would imagine the Labour leadership very proud, one of its MPs. It's few working class Muslim women has picked up such a prestigious award. So I'm guessing they sent you lots of congratulations.
Well, I was delighted to win the award, and it was an award actually chosen by young people who participate in the Patchwork Foundation courses. But no, sadly, no, I didn't receive any messages or congratulations from the party, and I don't know why.
I think I'm afraid to say that speaks its own story. Apsana, honestly, it's been such an honour to have you on International Women's Day, and I do think that your courage in speaking out about your experience is so important for so many of the women across the country. And I think this is a damning indictment of how politics works, but also shines a light on how things within the Labour Party, well, I think things where they're at. And I think this should horrify people. And I think beyond, there'll be people here who don't share our politics, who aren't on the left of the Labour Party, but I would hope that they have some decency and humanity and show solidarity towards you. They put aside whatever politics they might have and accept that this is an unforgivably awful situation that you've been in. But honestly, it's such an honour to have spoke to you on this day. So love and solidarity, and thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.